Hey everybody, this is Pat Torpy from Mr. Big, and you're listening to Music Mania.
Man, we really appreciate you being on, man. How's everything going? I know you're out there on the road, and I know you've been doing a bunch of shows this summer, and you just got a few left to go, right?
Yeah, we have. Well, there's a lot going on. We have several projects that we're in the middle of, and it's been a very busy year.
I think you got St. Charles, Illinois, coming up here this Friday night, just suburb of Chicago at the Arcadia Theater. Man,
Yeah.
It's just great. And I know, one of the Shondells happens to be a friend of ours. That's kind of how we got this going. We're good friends with Greg Smith, who's been on several times. And I know he loves being in the band, and he's with Ted Nugent as well. So that's
Who is that? Which one is that?
Greg Smith.
Oh,
Yeah,
sure.
Your bass player is good friends of ours. Been on the show multiple times. And
Greg's a great friend.
yeah, I was like, well, Greg, you play with Tommy James, and I was like, we do a lot of hard rock stuff, and I was like, we've got to get Tommy on, man, because of everything you've done, being a part of the American lexicon as you have, a true legend in my book, Tommy. So,
Well, thank you very much.
oh, absolutely. And so you got a few more shows coming up, and then what's going on after these shows? You said you had a few more projects. What can you?
Yeah, we have. Well, of course, we're in the middle of doing a movie. The movie of our book, Me, the Mob, and the Music, is being turned into a movie.
I knew that you were looking into a Broadway presentation. That sounds.
And yes, and the Broadway version will be after the film. But they wanted to do the movie first because if there was any problem with the movie, with the Broadway show, the movie never gets made. So they want to do the movie first.
Oh, that's great. And I was going to ask you about that because I just got done reading the book. Your management sent it over. It's awesome. Rolling Stone called it one of the 25 greatest rock memoirs of all time. To me, it's number one, just edging out Motley Crue's The Dirt. So there's that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yeah, there's a lot going on. Of course, we'll be near Chicago this weekend at St. Charles, Illinois, at the Arcadia Theater, and we're looking forward to that. We've played there a couple of times, and it's always exciting. It's always a fun night.
We'll just kind of talk about performing in your shows these days, because you've been at this for over 50 years, Tommy, and definitely not dating anyone. 50 years you've been at this, which is unbelievable. But to still have this drive and still have this passion to go do this, you have so many hits. Do these songs, what do they mean to you? The Sweet Cherry Wines, the Dragon, the Lions. What do those songs mean to you when you perform them now, as opposed to?
They're all like your children.
Yeah.
And every one of them is a momentous event for us. And honestly, I look out at our concert crowd now, and I see literally 3 generations of people.
Yeah.
It's really amazing. And, when we first started out, no way in the world was starting out with a record like Hanky Panky did. We think we'd still be doing this for 50 years. And, rock and roll is an industry that maybe gives you 2 or 3 years, if you're lucky, when you're in the major leagues. And so I'm just astounded by all this. We've been really very fortunate. The fans and the good Lord have been very good to us.
Well, Tommy, I wanted to ask you kind of about your songs. They've been in iconic TV shows and films. You had 3 songs in The Wonder Years, a song in Forrest Gump, and just kind of your voice being the voice of a generation.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that very much. We've been really lucky. We've had over 300 cover versions of our songs done by artists as varied as Billy Idol to the Boston Pops. You know what I mean?
Joan Jett and Tiffany, can't forget them.
It's just been an amazing collection of artists that have done our stuff, and I'm always very flattered and honored when a young band thinks a quick way to a hit record is to do one of our songs. I'm always very flattered by that.
Well, and it's unbelievable for you because, in reading your book, just seeing how impassioned you were about music, you would do anything you could to hear music. You would sit around the jukebox and just try to listen. And
That's true.
I believe that, to me, like in reading your book, that just seems like that led you on such a life's path, and how you were able to record Hanky Panky at 16 years old, which is unbelievable to me that in this day and age, you just don't see that. You don't see someone, I don't know, maybe the music business has changed so much, but just at 16 years old recording that song. Of course, I believe you'd heard the Spinners perform that, a version of it, before you kind of got a hold of it, so we got to strike on this.
That's true. That's very true. The first record was really a fluke. we had a little label deal back in our hometown of Niles, Michigan, and or my hometown of Niles, Michigan, had a little deal on a label called Snap Records, and it was literally produced by a local disc jockey, and we recorded Hanky Panky in a radio studio, and this was back in 1963. And the record came out early '64, and it did okay. I mean, it didn't blow the doors down, but it did okay locally, and it kind of came and went, and it ran its course. And so I graduated from high school in '65, and I took my band on the road up through the Midwest, and we were doing clubs. And in early '66, I'm playing this dumpy little club in Janesville, Wisconsin, and all of a sudden, right in the middle of our 2 weeks, the guy gets shut down by the IRS for not paying his taxes. so we get sent back home. And we're all feeling like losers going back home, but that's how the good Lord works. Because as soon as I got home, I got the call that changed my life. That Hanky Panky, this record that we had recorded 2 years earlier, was suddenly sitting at #1 in the city of Pittsburgh, and just out of nowhere, it's like one of those only in America stories, and. So I went to Pittsburgh by myself because I couldn't put the original group back together. And sure enough, I got to Pittsburgh. We're sitting at #1. They had bootlegged 80,000 records and sold them in 10 days. We were at #1.
Wow.
So anyway, that was how that happened. And then I sort of grabbed the first bar band I could find to be the new Shondells, and we hightailed it to New York, where we sold the master to Roulette Records, and then they took it to #1 all over the country in the summer of '66. So that's how my career started, and it was really, as I say, one of those only in America stories. Well, probably couldn't happen today either.
Yeah, well, before you got that call and everything started kind of rolling into place, how close were you to taking a job outside of the music business?
Well, very close. I mean, this was, of course, back before I went on the road, but coming right out of high school, I was married and had a son, and I had to get a job. So I came very close to getting a job, in a store before we decided that we could make a living playing music.
Yes, and thank goodness things worked out the way they did, because, following up with such big hits with Crimson and Clover, of course, it goes on and on. Mony Mony, which, by the way, you did a music video for that. One of the first artists to really experiment with music videos about, 15 years ahead of its time, before, of course, MTV. I mean, that's kind of unbelievable that had the foresight.
It was the first play. It was, we couldn't get Mony Mony. It was the video of Mony Mony played anywhere in the United States, and the only place we could get them played is in movie theaters in Europe, in between double features. So it was, me and Daffy Duck for a long time.
Well, interestingly about your music, I mean, of course, like you're, very young to have been forged from the era that you came from, kind of forged from the ashes of Elvis Presley and, of probably the British invasion as well.
That's true, that's right.
But, you see kind of how your music stood up. You had songs like Crimson and Clover, which were very much, kind of in the vein of, the malt shop type songs that you recognize from that era. But music was changing around that time. You had harder edge acts coming out, the Jimi Hendrixes, the Janis Joplins, the psychedelic was coming into play. Yeah. And then at that same time, you guys turned down playing at Woodstock. So did you consider your music kind of separate from what was going on with kind of the late 60s?
Well, we were able to sort of straddle the fence.
Yeah.
And I must tell you that we went out, first of all, on the road with Hubert Humphrey, who was vice president running for president. And while we were out on the road, we wrote Crimson and Clover. And we came back and recorded it as soon as we got back. And Crimson and Clover allowed us to make the jump from AM top 40 singles, AM radio, to FM progressive rock, and started selling albums. before that, we sold our share of albums, but we never really sold a whole lot of albums at Roulette. And after Crimson and Clover, it was all albums. So we had, as a matter of fact, the reason I bring up the presidential campaign back then is because when we left to go out with Hubert Humphrey in August of '68, it was all singles on the radio. It was us and the Rascals and Gary Puckett and all singles. When we got back 90 days later, it was all albums. It was Crosby, Stills and Nash, Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And in that 90-day period, the whole industry turned upside down. And we knew that if we didn't start selling a lot of albums very quickly, our career was going to be over right there. There was this mass extinction of AM artists. And so we were very lucky to have Crimson and Clover at that moment because, as I say, Crimson and Clover allowed us to make that jump from AM to FM. And it really was a very, very important record for us. And then it really gave us the second half of our career.
Yeah, it definitely did. But we mentioned how you turned down Woodstock. I believe you told a secretary.
Yes, that's true. That's true. We were invited to Woodstock. My secretary called me. We were in Hawaii, as a matter of fact. And my secretary calls me up out there and says, Artie Kornfeld was up, and who was a friend of mine, and he also was one of the principal promoters at Woodstock. And he says, yeah, they're doing a gig in upstate New York at this pig farm, and they would really like you to come. I said, what? You're calling me from Hawaii asking me if I want to play a pig farm in New York State? I said, I'll tell you what, if we're not there, start without us. And they did. And by Friday, we knew we screwed up really bad.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, just kind of what level of regret you have. Do you still think about that and wonder what it would be like?
That's right. Well, something, I've actually over the years gotten more mileage out of telling this story.
Yeah. Oh, that's hilarious. True. But it's that you don't know these things. These things come up. But I want to ask you.
And everything back then was that way. Everything was just this hit and miss, serendipitous kind of stuff where you never know who's going to ring the phone next. The '60s were an amazing moment to make it because all the ducks were in a row. Radio, TV, the record companies were all waiting for the next act and waiting for the next record. It wasn't at all like today, where it's tough for a new act to even get noticed.
It absolutely is, and sign of the times, certainly. But I want to get real quick back into the book, Me, the Mob, and the Music, which is great.
Sure.
Came out in 2010. It's still available on Amazon.com, of course. But one of the reasons you said you waited so long to write it is because you had to wait for all of the people from Roulette Records to pass away so that you wouldn't be involved in some sort of a mob hit, man. That's what a crazy story.
The reason... let me just backtrack a second. The reason the title of the book is Me, the Mob, and the Music is because it's essentially an autobiography. But about two-thirds of the book is devoted to this very crazy and frightening, frankly, relationship we had with Roulette. And the reason why it was so scary is because, unbeknownst to us, when we signed with the label, Roulette, in addition to being a functioning record label, was also a front for the Genovese crime family in New York. And, of course, that made life really interesting for us.
Yes.
And so that was the story. And when we started writing the book, we were going to call it Crimson and Clover, and we were going to write about, being in the studio and writing hits and all that. It would have been interesting, but we looked at each other about a third of the way into it, and Martin Fitzpatrick, my co-writer, and I said, if we don't tell the Roulette story, we're really cheating ourselves and everybody else, because that really is the story.
Yes.
And so I was very nervous about continuing because, some of these guys were still walking around. And so I, we put it on a shelf for about a year, and finally, about a year later, the rest of them were dead, frankly, and had, died of one cause, some natural cause, some not, and so we felt we could go ahead and finish the book, and that's what we did. And as soon as we finished the book, we got a deal immediately with Simon and Schuster. And then suddenly getting calls for the movie rights and the Broadway rights. And I've often said it was, it's a good thing we stuck it out at Roulette and didn't leave. First of all, because now I get to tell the story.
Yeah. The story and the film to follow. Who would you see playing a young Tommy James in this film? I'm just trying to put together. I think Zach.
That's a very tough question. I'm getting an amazing education in all this because, well, first of all, Barbara DeFina is producing the movie. Barbara produced Goodfellas. She produced Casino. She produced Hugo with Martin Scorsese a couple of years ago. She's just had an amazing string of hit movies. And the screenplay has been written by Matthew Stone, who's a brilliant screenplay writer. And right now they're putting a deal together for the director. There's about 3 people they're talking to right now. So, every time somebody comes on gets involved in the project, it's a whole new negotiation and schedules and everything. So we're probably looking at another 2 years before this thing actually would be on the screen, and because they still have to go through casting, and so I'm getting an amazing education in all this.
Yeah, it's definitely quite the process. It takes a few years to kind of get it underway, but I want to ask you kind of about your influences growing up and some stories you may have of kind of meeting those people when you're getting into the music business and kind of becoming a fan and looking at them.
Sure. Well, I started out a very young kid. I started playing the ukulele when I was a tiny little kid. I was 4 years old, and graduated to a guitar when I was 9. And as a matter of fact, when I saw Elvis Presley the first time on TV, the ukulele went out the window, and I got a guitar. And then a year later, when I was 10, I got my first electric guitar, and I was, learning everything I could learn on the radio and records, and had a huge record collection. And when I was 12 years old, we started my first band. And I started playing local dances and school variety show and stuff like that. And that group was called the Tornadoes.
Yep.
And we played all through southern Michigan. And then when I was, we had actually 2 little label deals before I was out of high school. And the second one was the one where Hanky Panky came from. And we recorded 4 sides for Snap Records back when I was like 15 years old. And, the rest is history. I really was very lucky because we made it right out of high school. And so I was very fortunate. I also worked in a record shop all through junior high and high school, and so I learned the trade papers, and I learned the various labels, and I learned who all the executives were, and the songwriters, and the publishers, and everything. It was really an amazing education, and I know that the good Lord just had it in mind for me to go through. It was like going to college. And I was getting an education at the record shop where I could also promote my band. And so all these things, it's amazing. The things that I learned in that record shop, I'm still using today. I'm still, functioning with today. It's amazing.
Well, as much as you've done, selling 100 million records, to worldwide tours, to being so recognizable. But do you ever have times where, you're on tour, you play a show, or you meet a fan that says, oh, I didn't know you had all those songs. I didn't know you played. I didn't know that was you, Crimson and Clover. I didn't know that, because I feel like it's one of those deals where it's just like you start talking about Tommy James and the Shondells, you start listing the songs, and you have people that'll just be like, I didn't know he sang all those songs.
Oh,
like,
yeah, my wife was one of them. I'm serious. My wife, Linda, when we first met, she said, "Oh, you did that? You made that record too? You did that one?"
Well,
and, so, yeah, that happens more times than you might think.
that's funny. I mean, because it's, growing up on this music, and I'm 33 years old. I grew up with my dad being such a huge fan and listening to this type of music. And when I brought this up to my dad, he was just flabbergasted. Like, we're having Tommy James on because, again, we do a lot of hard rock stuff. Greg Smith, your bass player, he's been in Alice Cooper, he's been in Ted Nugent. We focus a lot on that era, and those guys say things like, we were heavily influenced by, of course, the Beatles and Tommy James. And now to have you on yourself, it's just like, you just think about the foundation of rock and roll itself, and you being forged from that era. It's truly unbelievable because I don't know where we'd be without.
It was all I ever wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I really have been very blessed over my life to get to do exactly to make a living at exactly what I wanted to do. It's very rare, and I'm thankful. I'm very thankful for it. I really am. And who thought, 50 years later, I'd still be singing Hanky Panky.
Oh yeah, you know it. And
these generations of people, I really, it's just it blows my mind when I really think about the big picture.
It is a big picture with you because these songs are like, Noah asked you earlier about, your songs being involved in these movies and stuff. And, having a song on the Forrest Gump soundtrack basically just says that you are one of the voices of that generation. And I think that speaks a lot to not just yourself, but your peers from the British invasion bands.
That's very kind of you to say.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Well, I'll tell you what, guys, TommyJames.com. That's where you can get all the info and all the upcoming events and on the shows. We're here in Kansas City, Tommy. We've got to get you to the Midwest because I know you're a born Midwesterner. You talk about being from Michigan, but you are from South Bend.
I'll be there this weekend.
Yeah.
Just outside of Chicago.
Outside of Chicago, which you're not far from from South Bend, where you grew up, and you grew up a big Notre Dame fan. I know you talked in your book about being a Notre Dame fan.
I always get excited when I come anywhere near my hometown. It's my old stomping grounds, and the fans are great out there. And it's just been the Midwest has really been where it all started for me.
Well, it was, and can't thank you enough for joining us, sharing these stories because it means so much to us as just huge fans of music and as yours as well, man. And can't wait to catch you. You got to get to Kansas City one of these days where we are, and we would just be glad. We'd be glad to come and just say hi, shake your hand at a show one of these times, man, because you've just your story and everything that you've done is so important to music, I believe. So.
Well, thank you so much. It's been wonderful talking with you, Clint.
Oh, you bet, Tommy. We'll catch up soon, and good luck in everything you do. We'll be looking for the movie in the next couple years, and we'll catch you at a show sometime soon, my man.
Thank you so much. Hope we can talk again.
You bet.